Okay, so last time we were looking at the materialist view of the mind, and we saw a couple of these sort of standard arguments against the common sense view, and now we turn to an argument which basically copies or steals the arguments from design, against the argument from design, to try to show that if we can argue that the design argument doesn't work, the same reasoning would apply to eliminating the mind. So, last time we looked at the design arguments, which were basically that, the universe seems, well, the world seems really well designed, there's got to be a designer, and which expands to, the entire universe seems pretty well designed, the entire universe must be designed, and we saw the counters. In the case of, the world seems really well designed, the counter people give is the chance argument. You get enough planets, and by pure chance, you can have the planet, seem like it's designed. And so even though if the odds are astronomical, if you have enough planets, there's bound to be, at least one such planet. And lucky us, we're on that planet. Now, then the other argument, of course, was, well, what about the entire universe? If the entire universe wasn't so fine-tuned with all the values, etc., we wouldn't be here. And then the counter to that is the multiple universes, where there's infinite number of universes, and lucky us, we're in the universe that actually works. But of course, if we weren't in a universe that worked, we wouldn't be here to be talking about it. So, just pure chance, no designer. Now, using the same reasoning, there's a technique in philosophy called, I mentioned this before, called parity of reasoning, as opposed to parody. And of course, parody is, making fun of something. For example, Saturday Night Live, when it's funny, is often parodying stuff. Like for example, Comedy Central, they have a show that parodies the president. And a lot of comedy involves parodying things. But of course, parody is not parity. Parity means literally on par. And so the technique of parity of reasoning is when you take reasoning that's used for something else and show that it would apply the same in this case. Typically it's used in arguing against something. So if you show that the same reasoning used to establish something, if you apply it at least to something absurd or impossible or ridiculous, you could say, there's something suspect in that reasoning. But you can also use it in a positive way. Namely, if reasoning works in one area, then it should also apply to another. So in this case, if we use the argument that eliminates God, the same sort of reasoning should eliminate intelligent beings as well. And without further ado, rolling through that. Now, the parallel argument for the design argument for the world is the design argument for intelligence, which is this. Our common sense view is that humans, at least some of the time, are intelligent beings, that we have minds. Our reasoning is this. Some of the behavior we exhibit, but clearly not all, seems to indicate the presence of intelligence, that we have a mind. And it would be unreasonable to attribute such behavior to unguided chance. So the inference is that humans have minds, that we do things with intent. Now, this, of course, matches the argument by design, except in this case, instead of saying, like in the large design argument, world seems designed, got to be a designer, this designer's intelligent, this designer's God, we say humans seem to act in intelligent ways, so let's say they're intelligent. Now, of course, since the argument is on par with the design argument, it is of course subject to the same counter. Basically the idea being, if an argument works against the original, then it works against something that's the same. So here's how the argument goes against intelligence. Even if the odds that creatures on a planet will behave in ways that seem intelligent are incredibly slim, the odds of there being such a planet will increase as you get more and more planets. So, given the size of the universe, big universe, lots of planets, then, throwing in Occam's razor, we can infer that all apparently intelligent behavior is the result of chance, just random stuff happening. And it seems intelligent only because we happen to, by pure chance, be on a planet where all the behavior happens to seem to be intelligent. But, not all. But there's no reason to postulate intelligence behind it, for the same reasons we saw in the design argument. Now, one way to counter that would be parallel to the big universe, the idea of fine-tuned universe argument, which would be this. If we could find other seemingly intelligent beings, we would infer, aha, the odds of this happening by pure chance is too low. There must be the reason why there seems to be intelligent behavior is because there actually is intelligence. That's like the fine-tuned argument. But of course, this can be countered as well, because even if the entire universe were teeming with seemingly intelligent life, not used in the essay, but if you've seen a lot of sci-fi movies, like Star Trek, Star Wars, there's Men in Black, the Marvel universe, like the latest one, Thor Ragnarok, the universe seems to be full of intelligent beings. Now, if that were true, if we went out in space and we're like, hey, all these planets just loaded with things that seem to act intelligent, well, that of course can be beaten the same way the fine-tuned arguments beat, namely this. We could just say, well, there are many, many universes, infinite number of universes, and even if the odds that a specific universe is inhabited by creatures that appear to be intelligent are astronomically, infinitely small, the more universes you get, the greater the odds. And so if we have to choose between an infinite number of universes, with us being on the one that seems like there's intelligent beings, or a universe with intelligence and just one universe, well, by Occam's razor, the infinite universe hypothesis wins out. And so the conclusion is that the methods that are used to disprove God and show that the argument by design doesn't work also in a way disproves not our existence, not denying that they're human beings, but the existence of our minds. And so this can be taken either as, a reductio on the attack on design arguments, or a logical conclusion that there really is no intelligence. And the more you watch politics, the more you'll probably go with there's very little or no intelligence. Before moving away from the mind to causation, anything about the mind stuff that needs more mind? Okay, or more stuff, mental stuff. Okay, now turn to look at our good dead friend David Hume, with of course a fine hairdo and impeccable taste in clothing. This is not the strangest picture of him. There are other ones. Little background for Dave. He was born in Scotland, so he's British, but not English. And he was born in 1711 in Edinburgh. He attended Edinburgh University, and like all people with great ambition then, he went to the most important city in the world at that time, which of course was Paris, France, which is still kind of an important city today. I hear they have good snails there, if you're into that kind of thing. Now, like many people who are very ambitious and went to Paris, he wanted to become a famous writer, and so he wrote a book. And like happens to most people who want to be famous writers, it was a utter failure. It basically just dropped dead off the press. Now, it was met not with anger, which is great if you write a book, because that means more sales and today appearances on TV shows. It was met with the worst thing that a writer can face, which is indifference. So what he did is he said, well crap, I better get a real job and make some money. And so in 1745, he tried to get a job at Edinburgh University, but because of his views, they said, no thanks. And so he was an unemployed writer, which is, well, pretty much standard for writers. In fact, it's kind of redundant in a way to say that. So in 1748, he did the thing that all writers do, which you've seen here, is get all those words, and the first ones didn't sell, so let's repackage that and see if we can sell it again. So he took his failed book, The Treatise of Human Nature, repacked it, and released it in multiple parts. First part was an inquiry concerning human understanding, which turned out to be successful. Then in 1751, he said, hey, that sold pretty well. Let's repackage the third part as a treatise concerning, or an inquiry concerning the principles of morals. That sold pretty well. He tried to get another job in 1752, did not get that job. In 1757, he wrote a very successful natural history of religion, which got him into more trouble. Then his most successful work, though, was a 6-volume history of England, which was successful. In 1776, he died probably of cancer or ulcerative colitis, and of course is still dead today. He was well liked and nicknamed St. David, which is kind of ironic given his views of religion, and you can go and find, St. David Street where he grew up. His tomb is also a place you can visit in Edinburgh. Last I saw of it, it was full of broken bottles and debris, because I guess that's how they do things in Edinburgh. And they were trying to raise money to get it cleaned up. I'm not sure what happened to that. So what was Hume motivated by, in addition to drinking and stuff? Well, like most of the philosophers during the modern time period, like Descartes, Locke, and Hobbes, he believed that although philosophy and science have been grinding along for centuries, almost 2,000 years, or over 2,000 years, there was nothing that was certain, that the foundations were like sand. And everything is debated, nothing is certain, everyone had contrary opinions, and basically, what Descartes, Locke, and Hobbes said, and what people say today, nothing is certain. Now, his approach was rather interesting. Whereas people like Descartes, Descartes tried to find absolute certainty. Hume said, the problem lies not so much in doing the philosophy, but in what should come before that. And his view was, before you can start talking about metaphysics and all this fancy stuff, you've got to figure out the nature of humans first. So his view was, we didn't understand human nature, and until we could do that, all the rest of the stuff is not going to work. So his goal was to figure out human nature. And once, he believed, that was done. Once you figure out the nature of humans, much like the overly optimistic Leibniz, his view was all the rest would be easy. Everything would just sort of fall into place very quickly. But of course it did not. so much for that. But good for the optimism. Now, like Descartes, Hobbes, and the other dead guys, his goal was to create a solid foundation for the sciences. In this case, again, based on human nature. So, ultimate goal. Now, because of this, because he's looking at human nature, one of the things he does is, something I mentioned before, is instead of asking the question, what is, say, the metaphysical thing, his question is, why do we believe that? So more psychology in a way than metaphysics, even though he does address metaphysical issues. And going back to the metaphor analogy I used, it's kind of like with a case of if a child says there's a monster in the closet, the psychologist is not going to say, what is the monster? The psychologist is going to say, why does a child believe in the monster? And of course the answer may be the child believes in the monster there because there's totally a monster in the closet. And if it's a name, probably that's where they, well, that and sewers, that's where they live. Classier monsters, closets, low class cloud monsters, sewers. Now we'll look now at Hume's famous analysis of causation. Now, one of the things people try to look at in the sciencey stuff, all the sciencey stuff, is how things work. Broadly speaking, causation, what causes what. And this can range from very basic stuff. You might recall when you took it for a science class, they probably had you boil water. Eventually they learned they could not trust me with fire, which is probably true. Still cannot be trusted with fire to this day. And so, you learn, you apply heat to the fire, it gets to 100 degrees centigrade, the water boils. And we're told that always happens. You assume the water is clean, normal pressure, et cetera, apply heat, water boils. We're also told with, all kinds of other things like in physics. We have all these fancy equations about orbits and volume and mass and density, and the idea is that they always work. Now there can of course be some exceptions, like with water. If you add alcohol to water or salt or dirt, then it changes the boiling temperature. We change the pressure, the boiling temperature changes as well. In fact, you can get water to boil without heat by lowering the pressure, no. And so, but our idea is under those conditions, things always work that way. And so we think in the sciences that there are these necessary connections, that if you apply heat to water under these conditions, it must boil. That if you have an equation for planetary motion, it will always work. And back then, of course, people raised the question, well, how does that work? What is the metaphysics behind that? Now Hume, before he died, maybe after he died too, depending on how things worked out, was an empiricist. So whatever you know about what's out there has to come through the senses. So when he approaches causation, he's going to basically say, crudely put, can you see the necessary connection? Can you see the causation? And, spoiler, I guess, is no. So what he's trying to do is basically this. We talk about, in the sciencey stuff, things like power, heat has a power to boil water, or that gravity has a particular force to it, and we can do, those calculations for gravity. And we talk about these in terms of necessary connections, that these two things must be connected. So, for example, we don't think that one day we'd be applying heat to water and applying heat and more heat, and it just would not boil. We think that would be impossible. And the only way that could happen would be like in a science fiction movie of some sort. So Hume wants to see if he can find the impressions that give us these ideas. Because again, Hume's view is whatever you know about what's out there comes from the senses. And so his idea is the only way you know something is you got to be able to trace it back to something in the senses. So his question is, where do we get those ideas? What is it that we see or experience empirically that underlies the notion of power, force, or necessary connection? Now what Hume will do, again to kind of give out a spoiler, he's going to go through and show that we don't have this. So ultimately says we don't have this idea, this connection. So the question changes from what is causation metaphysically to psychology. Why do we believe it? It goes from the question of what is the monster in the closet to why do we think there's a monster in the closet. Now, he begins by looking at external objects, which is, stuff out there. Now, on one hand, we may think we can see the connection. You take, a beaker of water in a classic, science experiment, you put the Bunsen burner there, light it up, and then you put it in the thermometer, and you look and you see when it hits 100 degrees centigrade, under normal conditions, the water starts boiling. And you write up your lab report. You've done science. Now, Hume says, when we observe stuff, we don't see the necessary connection. We just see one thing following another. He uses the example of a billiard table. And I should look this up. Billiard is not the same thing as pool. They're not similar, but they're different. I used to know the difference, but I stopped caring, so I know they're different, but I don't know how anymore. But Google knows, because Google knows all the things.
Everything.
It knows everything. Oh, except apparently when the Russians are buying ads. They don't know that. Facebook doesn't know that either.
Not that advanced.
Yes, not that kind of stuff. So when we see something like, if someone's playing billiards and they hit the ball with a stick, we just see stick, move, ball, move. We don't see any necessary connection. Now, you might say, but I'm seeing it. I'm seeing the stick hitting the ball. I'm seeing it move. And he would say, yeah, you're seeing that, but you don't see the necessary connection. You don't see. I mean, to use a crappy analogy, you don't see like to go with like the Matrix. You don't see the underlying like code. You just see the stuff happen. Now he does claim if we could somehow discover cause and effect and somehow see it, we could reason predict effects by reason alone. So if we somehow could see causes, we would know how everything would turn out. But his claim is, when we just observe stuff, we never see a necessary connection. We never see that A must follow B. All we ever see is A follows B. And he does illustrate this later on, but this in a way does make sense, because if you see one thing happen followed by another, you don't know if it's always going to happen. For example, years ago when I was an undergrad, I had my little 13-inch black and white TV. I had one of those big ones too. They were no color. It wasn't like a flat screen, because there were no flat screens then. And had like the little dial thing. Back then there were 3 channels. I'm sure you've heard these terrible tales of limited channels. And of course, in the rabbit ears, and of course the signal would go out. And one time I was watching TV, and the show got all fuzzy and stuff, and I snapped my fingers, and the picture immediately cleared up. And my friends were like, because I had TV, and they didn't. They're like, "How did you do that?" And I said, "Power, powers." And like, wow, it's really impressive. And of course, it's not something I could ever do again. Although a couple of times it did happen. I snapped my fingers, and it would happen. But seeing that happen, of course, they would not, any sensible person would think that was just coincidence. Now, if the next time it got all fuzzy and I did it, nothing happened, the next time you think, oh yeah, that was coincidence, clearly. But if it kept happening over and over, you would start thinking, well, maybe there's a connection. But of course, you don't actually, there's no difference between the first time and like the 10th time, except the 10th time is the 10th time. You never see the connection. So Hume says when it comes to external objects, we never see it. We just see one thing happen followed by another. Now maybe we can go inside our minds and see the connection in there. Namely, maybe reflecting on our mind's operations, what goes on in there, we could find this causal connection. Maybe we have a better way to see what's in there, or since it's all in our mind, we can see the full thing. We can see things we may not be able to see out in the world. Now, on one hand, we may say, well, we do seem to have internal powers. One seems to enable us to move. We think of moving our hand moves. We want to think of like a new idea, and we can think of a new idea. So we're conscious that our bodies seem to follow our will. So they may think, aha, I can think of ideas, I can will that I move, and I move, so I must be aware of this necessary connection, this power. But Hume says, no. And he gives the following arguments. First problem is the classic mind-body problem we saw before, which is, if we buy into, Cartesian dualism, you've got a ghosty mind, you've got a physical body. The question by which the ghost operates the machine, the shell, is utterly mysterious. And he says, sort of extremely but correctly, that the mind, the ghost, can move the body is no more mysterious than if you could move mountains with your mind or control planets' orbits with your mind. It'd be no more weird or extraordinary. I mean, it'd be larger in scale, because we normally think if someone just goes poof and a mountain flies up, you go, wow. Whereas someone just says, look, I'm moving my hand, we think, they're very different. But as Hume notes, in a way, there is a difference in scale, but not really a difference in kind. You know, if the ghost can move, how does a ghost move the arm is no more mysterious than how the ghost can move a mountain. So, he says, in order to know what was going, you know, the causal connection, we'd have to know the power, how it connects to the effect, how the soul and body are united, and the nature of these substances and how they interact with each other. And as Hume points out, no one solved mind-body problem. So when we go to look at our interaction between our mind and our body, we don't actually see how that works. We don't see the power. And he seems to be right. You know, since the time of Descartes, and Descartes put forth, you know, dualism, they've been trying to solve that problem. Second problem, voluntary control. Now, one thing everyone's noticed is that you have voluntary control over some parts, but not all, which in some way can be good. Yeah, it's probably good you don't have to like remember to make your liver work or like your heart, you know, work. So it's probably good those are on, you know, automatic. But of course, the only way we can tell that we can influence one rather than the other is not by just somehow seeing, you know, a power, you know, that we have to move the hand and not the liver. It's only by sort of guess, you know. Can you move your arm? Yep. Can you make your liver do some liver stuff? No, probably not. Or like with the pupil, you know, if someone says, you know, can you move your eye around? You're like, yeah. Well, can you just simply make your pupils contract at will? And the answer is no. That'd be kind of handy, I suppose. If you want to like just take a nap, just like zoop. Or the same with hearing. You know, you can move your ears around, and you can decide to pay attention or not pay attention, but you can't control your hearing, which also would be super useful for nap time. Or during really boring classes or meetings, just go zoop. It'd be even better if you could leave in like, you know, for keywords like donuts, or meeting is over, so you don't miss important stuff. Now, so he says, we just figure this stuff out by experience, but we never see like the power. So we have to go and say, you know, can I do that? And you have to kind of try. And the only way you find out is, well, works there, the other one doesn't work. So he says, we never perceive this supposed connection or power. Thirdly, he says the process is unknown. Namely, you know, he goes through a very detailed argument. Essentially, you will a particular event, like moving your hand, and a series of events occur, perhaps unfortunate events, and then, you know, there's movement, and we're not conscious of a power to do this. It just kind of happens. So the connection between thinking about it and making it happen, we don't know. Now, today a person might say, but hey, now we have all this like sciencey stuff. We know about the central nervous system, we know about the nerves, etc. In detail. I mean, Hume knew about nerves, but in detail they weren't aware of it. Surely we understand how this works now. Mm-hmm. But Hume would still say, well, yeah, we've got more particulars about, you know, the nerves and so forth, but we still don't see the power. You know, you have a thought, and you got these nerves and stuff, but you don't actually see the power of the connection. One thing happens followed by another, followed by another, followed by another, but you never see the necessary connection. Or so he claims. So he claims the process and power are unknown. Now he then turns to comparing types of causes. Now in the normal course of events, most of us fairly confidently explain common things happen. Why, you know, if something falls, imagine you're explaining to a kid and something falls, and the kid says, why did that fall? You'd say, yeah, you'd say gravity. And the kid would probably if they're probably going to grow up to be like annoying, like a philosopher or scientist or something, they'd probably say, what's gravity? And at that point, you'd say, yeah, magic. Yeah, because we really don't know what gravity is. Where is it sounds? You know, Isaac Newton, you know, the whole apple thing. We say, why do things fall because of gravity? And then when people say, how does gravity work? Well, we really don't know. Similarly, when it comes to like plants growing, you know, we talk about them, you know, pulling in carbon dioxide, putting out oxygen, getting, you know, carbon and so forth. But of course, eventually, you think of like when an inquisitive kid keeps asking why. Eventually, you run out of, you know, answers. Or like with food, you know, why does food nourish? Well, you talk about the vitamins in it. Why does it do that? And eventually, you kind of run into no explanation. So we think we understand common things because we have words to say like gravity or nutrition. But Hume claims this is really just a habit. When the cause appears, we expect the effect to occur. So we see, you know, time after time things, you know, fall, and so when we see something like fall, you know, go off a ledge, we expect it to fall. We say gravity, but we really don't understand why. Now, when it comes to extraordinary things, and Hume was talking about, you know, during his time period, they didn't know why earthquakes occurred, pestilence, etc. He claims people, you know, couldn't explain those things, so they assign it to supernatural causes, you know, God, etc. Because they think that you can't explain that by, you know, the common phenomena. Now, of course, today we think we can explain it. We talk about earthquakes in terms of, you know, plates and pressures and so on. But still, even though we don't go to God typically, we still end up running into things we don't explain. Now, as Hume notes, that it's basically a difference in familiarity. So when really weird things happen, we think we don't know why it's happening, but we have no more understanding than we do with common events. You know, Hume doesn't say this, but in a way, the only real difference is that we have some words for the normal stuff, and we don't have words for we run out of words quicker for stuff that's not, you know, the common stuff. So when you talk about something falling, we say gravity, but then we run out of stuff. And if something really weird happens, we don't have, you know, words for that. And so he claims that we don't see in the normal stuff or in the weird stuff any connection. We just kind of think we've got in the case of normal stuff because it's so familiar, but he claims we really don't. So he believes there is no necessary connection. Now, the necessary connection that he's looking for, again, is one such that A causes B, and we somehow see the connection, that it must occur that way. Well, what he says is basically this. Again, being empiricists, we have to be able to get it with our senses. If we look at the external world, we don't see it. If we look inside, we don't see it. Now, going back to the, you know, the example I led with about, you know, snapping my fingers and having the TV suddenly, you know, stop being fuzzy, when we have something happen that we've not seen before, we just see one thing followed by another. Again, going back to that example, if the TV's fuzzy, I snap my fingers, and someone says, wow, you've got to have magical powers, you know, anybody sensible would say, no, that's probably just coincidence. So in the case of a single case, we don't see the connection. And we wouldn't think there was a causal connection. One thing happens, followed by another. Same thing with the mind and body, as we saw. He claims we think we've got an understanding of it, but as we saw with the mind-body problem, etc., we don't. We don't see the necessary connection. So what he ends up saying is there's no conceivable instance of connection. As he says, all events seem separate. One event follows another, but no tie can be observed. So he ends up saying, his conclusion at this point in terms of the metaphysics is we can have no idea of this necessary connection, that these terms have no meaning in philosophy nor in ordinary life. Again, going back to the monster thing, he says, you know, again, we can imagine he's looking at causation the way psychologists look at a kid who says, there's a monster in the closet. And of course, if the person was humoring, you know, or part of the therapy for the child, you know, put up like cameras and sensors and stuff. And of course, the monster never shows up on the cameras, it never shows up in the sensors, no one ever sees the monster. The inference to make would be there is no monster, because you never see it. And Hume goes looking for causation, and he says, you never see that connection. Just one thing followed by another. Now, just like with the monster, Hume is not denying that we think there's causation, that we talk about it, just like when the kid is afraid there's a monster in the closet, the psychologist is not going to say, no, the child is not afraid, no, the child doesn't think there's a monster in the closet. They're going to say, yeah, they think there's a monster in the closet, but there is no monster. So the question switches from, what is the monster in the closet, to why does a child believe there's a monster in the closet? So then, why do we believe there is causation if we've never observed it? Again, going back to the monster example, if the child has never seen the monster and there's no evidence of the monster, why do they believe that? And so why do we believe in causation? Is it because we never got the pony we wanted? Perhaps. It's kind of a weird example. Most people I know never wanted like horses. Once they think about like how tough they are to feed and clean and stuff, they're like a really big dog that is really expensive to feed. But they're pretty cool. They're always best if there's someone else's taste. It's like a pool. You always want like someone else to have the pool, because then they do all the work, and he's like, you know, nice pool, don't be clean. Now, why do we think this? Well, what he claims is this. What we do is, when we experience stuff, we start making, you know, predictions. You know, we have experiences enough. So, if one type of event is found conjoined with another, one thing happens, another thing happens, and it happens enough, what basically happens is, eventually, we start to predict without reservation. We start calling one cause, one the effect. So essentially, yeah, it's a psychological analysis. I mean, going back to the example, like me snapping my fingers, you know, weirdly enough, it actually happened, you know, a few times, enough in a row. And what I think what it might have been doing is, I could kind of tell it was going to clear up, so I stabbed my finger like right before it did, so it looked like I had powers. And so what happens is, the first time we see something happen, we'd say, oh, we don't know. And then if it happens again and again and again and again, we start thinking, aha, it's going to happen the next time. So, like for example, well, with water, I mean, presumably the way people figure out water, believe that water boils 100 degrees centigrade is, you do it again, you do it again, and again and again, and it happens over and over, and then you eventually say, well, the heat causes this effect, it must be a causal connection. In fact, if you take the critical thinking class or a science class that does like science method, in a way that's how you do it. When you run an experiment, what you do is you have to find the result at a statistically significant level, which means it has to occur often enough in the population, and you'd say one thing causes another because it happens so often. So for example, if you were, you know, owning a pharmaceutical company and you're testing a drug that's supposed to lower blood pressure, you give like the people in the control experiment, you know, some would get the medicine, some would get the placebo, and if you find that there's a statistically significant reduction in blood pressure, you would say that, you know, it causes the reduction in blood pressure, basically because it happens so many times. Now, so Hume's analysis of how we behave is pretty correct. It happens over and over again, and eventually say, hey, that's the cause, that's the effect. Now, but what he notices is this. It's a matter of habit rather than actually seeing a causal connection. And he illustrates this with a billiard ball example. Again, billiard's not pool, but similar enough. So the first time, imagine that you're seeing a billiard ball game for the first time ever. You imagine like as an infant staring at it. And what would happen is, of course, is that psychologically, the kid would see, the stick hit the ball moves, stick hits the ball moves. Eventually the kid would say, well, they're connected. I see this happen, it happens again, it happens again, it happens again, it happens again, and they'd say, aha, there's a connection. Or to use another example, like in, have you ever played like video games that have like puzzles in them? You gotta figure like how things work. And if you see like you put a particular lever, like a light goes on, another lever, light goes on, another lever, light goes on there, and you keep doing that, you'd think, aha, every time I move this lever, that light goes on, this lever, that light goes off, and you would believe that there's a connection. But of course, the only difference between the first time you did it and the last time is the number of times it occurred. You don't see anything, you don't see the connection. To use a metaphor, you don't get to look into the secret code of how it works. You just see one thing followed by another, over and over again. Now what he's talking about here is basically similar to what have you ever heard of the Pavlov dog, case? Any sort of Pavlovian before Pavlov. In the famous Pavlov dogs example, what would Pavlov do to that poor dog? Well, he'd give the dog, some food, ring a bell, give the dog some food. Which is nice. And then he'd ring the bell, give the dog food, ring the bell, give the dog food. And so the story goes, eventually when he rung the bell, the dog would start salivating, anticipating food. And because the dog, the idea of the dog believed that the bell would, result in food. And of course the dog could be tragically disappointed. So we're like, humans Pavlov and before Pavlov, that's what happens to us. We, you put popcorn kernel, put the popcorn before it's popped in the microwave, put in the numbers, and then popcorn appears. And you do that often enough, you expect that to happen. And Hume says we're becoming psychologically conditioned, like Pavlov's dog. Bell rings, get food. Bell rings, get food. Just like with the boiling water or microwave or whatever, it happens, we expect it to happen again. But, like the dog, we never see the connection. Or so we claim. So when we think of as cause and effect, we end up with not what we think we're thinking about. How so? Well, given the psychology of it, according to Hume, there are basically two definitions of cause. Cause one. We experience that similar objects are always conjoined with another. For example, that you got an object followed by another, and we basically believe that all objects similar to the first are followed by objects similar to the second. If the first object had not been, the second would not exist. To give a concrete example, this would be like we observe that heat, conjoined with water results in boiling. And so we think that's a cause. A is conjoined with B. And without the heat, there would be no boiling. Second definition is this. This is the psychological one. The appearance of a cause always conveys to the mind by customary transition to the idea of the effect. So the object A leads us to think about B. So in the case of heat and water, we think that we think of the heat, then we think of the boil. He says that's the second definition of cause. Now the problem, he says, is that both these definitions are drawn from circumstances that are foreign to the cause. Namely, we lack it in the definition, something that actually connects the cause with the effect. We have no idea of the connection, nor a distinct notion even of what we want to know. So we don't even know what we want to know, let alone know we know something about it. To illustrate, he gives the example of a vibration of a string, like a guitar string or violin string, or ukulele, depending on your instrument of choice. So we say that when a string vibrates, it creates a sound. You know, if you ever had a music class, you know, they'll tell you that's how strings work. Now, what we mean is that this vibration is followed by sound, and that either, definition one, all similar vibrations are followed by similar sounds. Or, definition two, on the appearance of one, the mind anticipates that there will be a sound. So if you see someone, you know, reaching, you know, to strum the strings of a guitar, your mind says, aha, there will be a sound. But he claims we can consider it in either way. But he claims beyond that, beyond A is followed by B, beyond we expect, you know, A to be followed by B, we have no notion of cause, or so he claims. So basically it's a psychological conditioning. Now kind of weirdly, we'll see this next time on the Monday, we'll see even though it seems to be totally unfounded, just a psychological delusion, he says it's really, really important. And one reason for this is because, as you recall, the book that he had great success with, or books, was The History of England. Hume was a historian, and so he notes the importance of cause and effect in history. So it's been kind of a weird thing. You know, cause and effect is purely psychological, but we totally need it for stuff. So getting back to the monster in the closet, his claim would be, you know, why do we think there's a monster in the closet? And his answer, in the case of causation, would be this. It's habituation. That's our analysis. But then he'll go on to say, we really need that habit. So have a good extended weekend.